Welcome back to another video. My name's Carl Goslin and today we're going to be looking at the new Nvidia VRSS option that they've enabled in their latest driver update. I know there's a few videos out there about this already, but having watched a couple of them, I think there's a few points that have perhaps been missed that might be useful to people wanting to enable this and get the most out of it. Now there's one thing that you absolutely must do to get this to work. And there's specifically one thing that you really mustn't do, otherwise you're kind of going to negate the point of the whole VRSS, variable rate super sampling. So first things first, I'll just tell you what super sampling is in case you don't know, which you might not do. Super sampling is where you take the native resolution of, this applies to monitors as well as VR headsets. So let's just say a 1080p monitor and you render it at 4 times its native resolution. So instead of rendering it at 1080p, you render it at 4K, which is actually 4 times its native res. And then you scale it back down and display it at 1080p. So what that does is give you a much sharper image and reduces the sort of jagged edges you see on straight lines within games. So the same thing works for VR headsets. So whatever the native resolution of your headset is, whether it's an early Rift or Vive with a low resolution, or whether you've got a newer headset, maybe a Valve Index or an Odyssey or something like that with a much higher resolution, the same principle applies. So if you 2 times super sample it, it will do it by double. 4 times super sample it, it will quadruple it. Just in the example of the 1080p, then rendering it at 4K and then shrinking it back down, that would be a 4 times super sample. And that's what it does. It gives you a sharper image, less jagged edges. Now, this is all good, but it comes at the cost of performance. When you're rendering something at 4 times, 6 times, 8 times its native resolution, that's a big hit on performance. And in VR, we're doing everything twice anyway, once for each eye. So it's a lot harsher on your graphics card than what it would be if you were doing super sampling just using a single monitor, for example. So yeah, big performance hit. Great visual improvement, big performance hit. Now, there are other ways to eliminate jagged edges in games. MSAA is another one, which is multi-sampling anti-aliasing. Now, this is interesting because it is a resolution-based form of anti-aliasing, so it does render at higher and then shrink down, but not in the same fashion as super sampling does. It doesn't do it pixel for pixel. It's complicated. I'm not going to go into exactly how it works because you don't need to know. But let's just say it achieves similar results, not quite as good, but with less of a performance hit. Now, for variable rate super sampling to work in our VR games, you actually need to have multi-sampling anti-aliasing turned on in each game that you want to use this with. So if for example you go into Boneworks, you go into the graphics options, you've got MSAA. If you turn that up to 8 times MSAA, and then you go into your Nvidia drivers. In fact, let's start some screen capture so I can show you a few things here. Alt and F9, yeah, cool. So let's bring up my Nvidia control panel. I'm trying to think of how best to word all this because it's quite complicated and I haven't scripted it, so forgive me if it seems a little disjointed. I'm trying my best to make it flow for you. So you bring up your Nvidia control panel. You go to Manage 3D Settings up here where my mouse is, and then Global Settings is what's default. Next to that, Program Settings. Here you can see I've already got Boneworks because I've been playing with it this afternoon. Boneworks is selected, so we'll leave it at that. If I then scroll down here, I keep pointing at things, but you can't see my finger, so it's pointless, you might say. So anyway, we scroll down here, and you can see at the very bottom, there's virtual reality variable rate super sampling. I've got it set to always on because I was playing around, and also because my 2080 and my 3800X CPU have no issue running with it always on in Boneworks. I didn't see any performance drop at all. I still had sort of 40% overhead looking at Oculus Tray Tool, so I had no issue leaving it always on. Just to point out, I was testing this on a Oculus Rift CV1, so one of the earlier low resolution headsets, and there's a reason I did that, which I'll tell you in a minute as well. So that's how you turn it on. You can put it to adaptive, which if you don't have a really powerful computer, you should probably do, because what that will do is it won't turn it on and off based on how much performance overhead you've got. It will actually, yeah, let me bring up another window. Like I say, it's going to be a little bit disjointed. Sorry about this. Let me bring this up here. What you see here, this is on the Nvidia Developers Blog website. The blue area that my mouse is circling around now, this is the area within the game, within our display, that is going to have the super sampling applied to it. The area around the outside edge here will stay exactly as it normally would if there were no super sampling. So, going back to the Nvidia control panel, always on will leave that area permanently super sampled. Adaptive varies the size of this area that you now see my mouse circling again. So if it detects that you're running out of performance headroom, your graphics card's about to struggle, it will actually shrink that circle smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it'll make it bigger and bigger again based on how much performance headroom you've got. The rest of the image around it will stay exactly as if you were just playing the game normally with no super sampling. So it's not going to look bad in the areas where it isn't on, it'll just look a little bit sharper in the areas where it is on. Now, whilst we're on this page, I've just obviously shown you how it actually works there and what it does to your image. If we scroll down here a little bit, it points out that we have to have MSAA on in the game, like I mentioned earlier. So this little diagram shows you here the frame starts, it then looks, is MSAA on? If it is, yes, configure variable rate, shading rate, variable rate, super shading rate, super shading, super sampling, whatever it should be. So, but if you notice, if you don't have MSAA on it, and the answer is no, it goes straight back to continuing on to render the frame. So there'll be no super sampling. So for games that do not have an MSAA option within the game itself, in the graphics options, this will not work. And this is what limits the number of games that are currently supported. It's not because Nvidia isn't supporting them all. It's not because developers need to do anything. It's simply that the game either comes out the box with MSAA embedded in it as a graphics option, or it doesn't. Now, Boneworks does. I think Robo Recall does as well. In fact, I've got some screenshots of the options menus from a couple of games, because I wanted to tell you something else in a minute as well. So we'll have a look when I bring those up and I'll reflect upon this. But yeah, first things first, your game must have MSAA as an option within the game itself, or this simply will not work. If your game does have that, awesome. Bring up the Nvidia control panel like I showed you a little while ago. 3D settings, program settings, find the game exe from the list. If it's not there, manually add it. Scroll down and put it to adaptive or put it to always on. It's entirely up to you. Pardon me. Adaptive seems to make more sense if you're unsure of your computer's performance. If you've got a girthy PC, 2080 Ti or even a 2080 like I have, you can put it always on. You'll soon notice if you start getting frame drops, because you'll probably feel motion sick like I do. So yeah, check within the game, MSAA available, excellent. Turn it up, come to here, turn this always on or adaptive, and that's it, job done. Now what happens from this point on is that you'll fire your game up, and when there is, let's say you put it to adaptive, when there is headroom available, that area we saw illustrated in the diagram in the middle will be super sampled and the image will be slightly sharper than normal. Now, here's where we run into some slight sort of issues with this idea. Because you've already got multi-sampling anti-aliasing on, and the higher you turn that up, so if you've got it on MSAA 2 times or 8 times, the super sampling can also be applied at those multiples as well. So if you've only got 2 times MSAA, you'll only have 2 times super sampling. If you've got 8 times MSAA turned on, then the Nvidia control panel can apply 8 times super sampling to that area in the middle. But here's the thing. If you turn on MSAA, which you have to, or it's not going to work, that already does a really good job of removing jagged edges. If you then apply super sampling, that isn't really much of an improvement in the overall visual quality. You've already removed, especially if you've got MSAA at 8 times, you've already removed the jagged edges. So this is a little bit of a conundrum. It's like, is it really noticeable? And I'm going to say just about that extra clarity within that area, but not massively so, because you've already removed the jagged edges using MSAA by whatever amount you choose to use it by. And I don't really know. I mean, normally you would choose one or the other. You'd either go super sampling, which will give you overall massive visual improvement from nothing, or if your graphics card can't do that, you choose MSAA because it does a pretty good job. Not quite as good, but good enough and removes all the jagged edges. You would combining the two in this sort of hybrid scenario. I don't really know whether it's worth it or not. I mean, there's almost no performance difference, so you may as well turn it on. Using Oculus Trade Tool, I didn't really notice much of a performance drop at all, so you may as well use it because there's nothing to lose. But to my eyes, I couldn't see a huge difference between just having MSAA up at 8 times and then having the VRSS on in the graphics drivers as well. Maybe other people will notice differently, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with my eyes, so it should be what I'm seeing. Should be pretty valid. But yeah, so that's an interesting one. You're turning on a form of anti-aliasing anyway, and then you're applying a small amount of additional anti-aliasing via super sampling to a selected area. The image already looks good. Now, talking about images already looking good, if you try this out on one of the more higher resolution headsets like a Valve Index or an Odyssey, or even an Oculus Quest via a cable, that has a very high resolution, jagged edges are not as evident on higher resolution panels because the pixels that those jagged edges are made up of are much, much smaller. So testing this on a high-res headset, if you turn super sampling on a Valve Index or on something high resolution, you don't notice as big an improvement in graphical sharpness as you would if you were using something like an old CV1, which is why I tested it on a CV1, because with these lower res headsets, the super sampling makes a massive difference to the overall sharpness of the image. But yeah, on a more higher res headset, it really doesn't. There is an improvement there before someone jumps down my throat and says, oh, I can see a difference. Yes, you can see the difference. But you do the same thing on an older one with a lower res, you'll see a much bigger difference. So, using this on those higher res headsets, and let's say you're using a Valve Index and you've put the MSA up to ×8, which you should do if you've got the performance to do it. You've got a lovely crisp panel that's high res anyway, so the jagged edges are minimized. Then you multi-sample anti-alias 8 times, getting rid of whatever jagged edges are left, and then you apply super sampling to a selected area in the middle. You've already got a really good quality image, off the bat, and then you get MSAA, making it even better. There isn't much left to improve there. So whilst the feature is a cool feature to have in our drivers here, and there's sort of no reason not to turn it on, I don't really think there's a massive gain, especially if you're using one of the high res headsets. I mean, as I say, I tested it on a CV1 specifically because super sampling makes a big difference on those earlier headsets because of the low res nature of them. So that's interesting. I have to do a bit of a recap and try and summarise all this crap I'm going through because it's complicated. So then the next thing I need to mention, and let's bring up I should have had these prepared, but I haven't. Let's bring up some screenshots of the options menus in a couple of games, because there's something you mustn't turn on that you may already be using that you'll now need to turn off. And I'll tell you why that is in a second. So, yeah, let's have a look at Robo Recall here. So here's the Robo Recall graphics options. You can see we've got MSAA here. So this can be tested using Robo Recall as well. MSAA only provides 4 times on this particular game. But immediately below it, you have pixel density, nor adaptive resolution, that's turned off. But pixel density, now this is super sampling. It's just not worded super sampling. So I've got it on 1.5, I've got my MSAA at 4 times because I have a powerful PC. Now, if you're going to run variable rate supersampling in the graphics drivers, you'll need to put your in-game pixel density or supersampling. It's called resolution in other games. In fact, I'll show you another one. Where are we? Yeah, this one here, this is Stormland. So if you look at the bottom right-hand corner here, we've got resolution. This doesn't allow you to increase it because this is a very graphically demanding game, so it doesn't let you go above 100%, but it lets you reduce it in case your computer struggles. So you want your in-game resolution, pixel density, if that's what it's called in that particular game. Here, this is the zero caliber menu screen. It just says VR screen resolution. You want the slider at default in the middle. This is 100%. This is no super sampling. Turning it up higher super samples the entire render, the entire screen, everything. If you're going to use VRSS, which only super samples the bit that you're actually focusing on, which is the idea, rather than stuff in your peripherals, to save performance, you must set these to default, to 100%, to 0, whatever it comes out the box set at. Because otherwise, you'll be VRSSing for your driver options. Then you'll be turning on super sampling within the game through one of these sliders here, either this one, or well, you can't with that one, it only goes to 100, or this one here, turning everything up. In which case you'll have super sampling on super sampling alongside multi-sampling anti-aliasing, and your poor computer's going to catch fire trying to do all this, depending on how girthy it is. So hopefully this is making a little bit of sense. If we're going to use VRSS, the game must have MSAA available. If it has, turn it up as much as you can, because this is the other thing. MSAA comes at a performance cost too. If you don't have a 2080 or 2080 Ti, you may not be able to run, let's say, Boneworks at 8 times MSAA. Have I got a screenshot of that somewhere? Oh, I have, yeah, right here. So yes, here we are. I was semi-prepared. Yeah, MSAA 8 times here in Boneworks. So if your computer can't do that, then you're probably not almost worth turning it on, because you're already struggling for performance. It's kind of a weird one. But like for me here, I could run it 8 times, no issues. I can run super sample. I can actually run, if I go into, oh, this is another good point. So don't turn super sampling up within game, whether it's called resolution, whether it's called pixel density, whatever it's called, in game, leave that at 100% or default. You mustn't also turn it up using Oculus Tray Tool, because again, a lot of us do. We go into Oculus Tray Tool, we go pixel density, and we turn it up. Don't do that either, because the whole point of VRSS is it only does that area in the middle. If you've got it turned up in game, or using Oculus Tray Tool, or in the Steam VR settings, that globally does the entire frame. So you'll not only will you be super sampling the whole thing, you'll then be super sampling the middle again, and then you'll be MSAA in as well. So poor old computer's going to struggle. I hope this makes sense. So no super sampling anywhere else. Not in game, not Oculus Tray Tool, not Steam VR. Only super sampling using VRSS if this is what you want to do. And to enable that, you must have MSAA on and have enough graphical overhead to be able to do it. If you can't run any MSAA as it is, then you're screwed. You can't use the feature, you need a more powerful graphics card. Well, so I hope that makes sense. I'm going to recap it just once more in my head to try and make it flow a little better, because it sounded like a big mess. So, to enable it, MSAA on in whatever game it is. Then you go back to your Nvidia control panel, manage 3D settings, program settings, game from the drop-down menu, adaptive or always on. That's it, job done. The game will run, it will use VRSS. If you go in the game and there's a resolution option, a pixel density option, an SS option, leave that 100% so you're not super sampling upon super sampling. And this will give you an ever such a slightly sharper image in the middle there, more noticeable on the lower resolution headsets, less noticeable on the higher resolution headsets. And also, of course, the higher resolution headsets require more power to run them in the first place. So this is where you may run into another struggle situation. If you have got a Valve Index, which is higher res, you may not, and let's say you haven't got a 2080 Ti or a 2080, you may not be able to run MSAA at all, in which case you can't run any super sampling. But as I say, the higher res headsets have a sharper image anyway and benefit less from super sampling or MSAA. And again, the whole thing is almost I'm going to use the word pointless, almost a little pointless, because with MSAA up, there aren't really any jagged edges to get rid of anyway, and the image is already sharp. But anyway, after that 20 minutes of waffle, how I managed to waffle on for that long, I don't know. Hopefully, you grasp how to turn it on, what it does, how it works, what you shouldn't do, and what you should do to get it to work as best as you can. And if you don't, that's the best I can do off the top of my head without script. Feel free to ask me any questions within the comments. Also, I've just started a Discord channel which everyone's welcome to join. I can't promise I'll be in there every day because I'm quite a busy chap. This is only, I've just started YouTube. There's a lot still for me to learn. Plus, I've got 2 small businesses that I run that take up my time as well, and a girlfriend and a life. So I can't promise I'll be in Discord every day, but I'll certainly poke my head in, as often as I can. If you wanted to join that, the link is in the description, and chat amongst other like-minded VR enthusiasts, sim racing enthusiasts, retro enthusiasts. There's a separate room for each one of those. But anyway, thanks very much for listening to me waffle for 20 minutes. I hope it made sense. If it doesn't, shit happens. I've done my best. Subscribe if you like this sort of waffle, and if you don't. Take it easy.